Well, this morning we're going to be looking at the Gospel of Luke. It's going to be Luke chapter 14, and we're going to be looking at 10 verses at the end of this chapter. And the title, and I'm sure you've guessed it just from what we have sung so far, is The Cost of Being a Disciple. So this is verse 25 to 35. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? If you lay the foundations and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, 'This person began to build and wasn't able to finish.' Or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he's not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and ask for terms of peace. In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples. Salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's neither fit for soil nor the manure pile. It is thrown out. Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear." Amen. May God bless the reading of his holy word. As I have said at the beginning when we're reading, we're going to be looking at the final 10 verses of Luke chapter 14, verses 25 to 35. And I wonder how many of us have the following social media accounts, if I can get this to work. So I was wondering, from a show of hands, who here has Facebook? Yeah, a good portion of you. Who has Twitter? A few. TikTok? Yep, 4 or 5. Pinterest? Yeah, a lot of the kind of arty people will enjoy that. Snapchat? 1, I think. Twitch? And Instagram. Yep, 3 or 4. I think most of us are used to the concept of kind of following or subscribing to a particular person or company, so that we don't miss out kind of what they're uploading, what photographs they're posting or whatever. And this is big business. I did a wee bit of Googling, and worldwide, it's estimated to be over £36 billion annually. And if you're good at using social media, it can make you a very successful person. And sometimes you are known as an influencer. And that's when companies just start throwing money at you to try and ask you to promote their products. And the top influencers are multimillionaires. And some of them get all their money and they're actually not doing very much. But one of the kind of most watched subgenres of influencers is those that offer self-help or self-care. These are people who give hints and tips about looking after yourself and making your life feel much better. And most of these videos usually boil down to looking at the brighter side of life, or the silver lining, or the positive bits. This morning, we are going to think about Jesus in what he says about following him and being a disciple of his. During our service this morning, we will find out that if Jesus was a modern-day influencer, he would be pretty terrible at it. The modern-day influencer is about being positive, about positivity, being happy. And as we read this morning in our passage, Jesus is the complete opposite. The verses that we're concentrating on this morning are particularly negative, and let's face it, are quite difficult. This morning, we're going to look at two particular images which Jesus uses to help the crowd understand what following him means. The first image is that of the cross, and the second is an image of salt. But before we look at these two images in more detail, you'll notice that Luke begins our passage this morning by telling us that a large crowd was following Jesus at this time. And at this point, Jesus starts telling them what following him would really mean. And you do wonder, is Jesus just getting annoyed? Because for the majority of them that are following him, they're only interested in the miracles or interested in his fights with the religious leaders. They enjoyed the spectacle and the drama of it all, rather than following Jesus because of who he is and what he was saying. The text doesn't tell us how Jesus is feeling at this point, but Luke records that Jesus warned the crowd that they must hate their parents, their spouses, their children, their siblings, even hate their own lives. Now that is quite a shocking statement by Jesus. You know, we're all told, or at least I was told, and I'm sure you were too, from a very young age, that you should never use the word hate. It's a strong word. So as when I used to say, oh, I hate that person or I hate this, Mum's like, no, you don't ever hate anyone. And I'm sure when we read this morning, we were thinking, what is Jesus talking about here? Surely he's not meaning that to follow him, we need to actually hate those that are closest and dearest to us. And you would be correct. When Jesus is using the word hate, what he's actually meaning is love less. Jesus is saying that to follow him, we must love him first. And then everything else after that, even our own lives. Now, even with this kind of new understanding of what the word hate means in the passage, I think we would agree that Jesus is still giving us a tall order to follow him. What Jesus is saying wouldn't go down very well in his day, nor if you said it to the public outside. In Jesus' day, family was everything. That's where you got your identity, where your worth was tied up in your family. And in our day and age, our worth tends to come from ourselves and what we think of ourselves. But that's usually followed on by our family. What Jesus was saying was completely counter-cultural in his day and in ours. If Jesus wanted followers, he was really going about it the wrong way. If he was trying to be a modern-day influencer, he would have bombed out with statements like that. And after making one controversial statement, Jesus then makes another. And the statement might be a bit lost in us modern-day readers because the symbol of the cross has changed so much from the day of Jesus. In the passage, Jesus tells the crowd that whoever doesn't carry their cross cannot be his disciple. And this brings to us and this brings us to our first image that we're going to talk about today. The cross for us is a religious symbol, and it's all over the places, from churches, from kind of healthcare with the cross and charities, to items of jewellery. And it's thought of as a symbol of goodness and love. Even people who aren't religious may wear a cross around their neck because of what it means. However, nothing could have been further from what Jesus' original hearers would have thought when they heard Jesus mention the word cross. In the ancient Near East at that time, the cross symbolized punishment and torture. The cross was so horrible and shameful. The Romans tended to reserve it for their worst criminals or political enemies that they kind of wanted to make a statement about. It was so disgraceful that the Romans were reluctant to use it on their fellow Romans. With this, you could imagine the horror, maybe even the kind of gasps, as Jesus told the crowd to take up their cross. Now, I've thought hard about kind of, what symbol in modern day culture would have that kind of same horror and shame attached to it. And one of the ones I could think of is maybe like the swastika, which is seen with horror, shame, and anger because of what it represents, at least in the West. If one of us saw it on a wall or whatever, we would feel these things because we know what it represents. The feelings of horror and shame are the same as what Jesus' audience would have thought as soon as they heard the word cross. Additionally, although the cross has been cleaned up for us, so to speak, it doesn't have the same association as it did for those who heard Jesus speak those words. We also understand that what Jesus is saying is that it will not be a walk in the park. We all know the saying about that's your cross to bear. Jesus is highlighting that following him wouldn't be easy, and there would be suffering involved in being a follower of Jesus. The second image which Jesus uses in the passage this morning is salt. Jesus confirms in verse 34, salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? And this verse is perplexing, and even when I've been reading, using commentaries and looking at biblical scholars, they've really struggled how to agree on an interpretation of this passage. Each one saying something slightly differently. One was saying that basically he tried to come up with different ways that salt could have lost or lose its saltiness. And then it basically came to the conclusion that it's almost impossible. And he's saying that that's what Jesus is saying. It's a kind of a rhetorical question, that a true disciple of Jesus would never lose their saltiness. And salt at the time was a valued item, something which was used in kind of agriculture. It was used to pay soldiers. At that time, a soldier would get a portion of their wages in salt. And that's where the saying, worth his salt, comes from. And Jesus alludes to the fact about the agriculture by stating that if salt loses its saltiness, it's useless for soil and manure. At that time, salt was added to the ground to destroy the ground's nutritional levels. And it was added to manure to increase its value as fertilizer. Jesus has used the imagery of salt previously, probably most famously in Matthew chapter 5, verse 13. In Matthew, he is talking about the distinctiveness of being a follower of him and how that should make us different from the world around us. In this passage, he is comparing again being a follower of him, and that means that we are distinctive from the world around us. In the previous verse, he told the crowd gathered around that to be his disciples, they had to give up everything for him. And that is just how distinctive we are from the world around us. Luke chapter 14, 25 to 35 is an extremely hard-hitting passage. It takes a lot of explaining because on initial reading, Jesus is telling us to hate our relatives and to take up our cross. However, this is a passage where Jesus warns the crowds and us about the dangers and challenges of being a follower of him. Jesus is showing the crowd that to be a follower of him, they would need to forsake everything close and valuable to them and potentially endure trials that come their way. During our time this morning, I've highlighted kind of 3 areas of warning that Jesus focuses on. The first one I have titled, The Correct Order. Jesus begins this passage with a shocking statement that a follower of Christ should hate their relatives, which we now understand is not hate as we know it, but it really means should love less. Jesus is saying that we need to prioritize our lives and that he should be our first love and everything else should follow on from this. As this says, when you put God first, all other things fall into their proper place. Jesus understands that this won't be easy. I'm sure we all know here that it's not easy. There's almost a kind of a battle in our lives between the different things that we love, all trying to get to that central chief point. And sometimes we stumble. We go off and give much attention to something that we shouldn't. The second area I've titled The Struggle. We mentioned that being a follower of Christ is a struggle, and Jesus was aware of this, which is why he told the crowd to take up their own crosses. Christ knew that following him wouldn't be a walk in the park, but it's costly. And when I was thinking about this, I was reminded of the German theologian and spy Dietrich Bonhoeffer. So as in when he sadly was hung 2 or 3 days before the end of the war because of his part to kill Hitler. But the quote on the screen is from his book about the cost of discipleship. And I'll just read it, it's actually a wee bit fuzzy. It is costly because it cost a man his life. And it is grace because it gives a man the only true life. Following Jesus will cost us. And I'm sure most of us here maybe could share about some of the costs that we've had to incur because we're a follower of Christ. I know from my own family that being a Christian has cost other relatives thinking we're a wee bit wacky because we're Christians, and so the relationship has broken down. I know that it's cost some of my family wages because they refuse to work on